The only advice you're going to need if you want to replace $5,000 in passive income, that means money sitting on your ass and doing absolutely nothing, and the money still comes in every month, that's about $60,000 a year. So how do you do that? Most people think they can do it through residential, and that's actually absolutely wrong. And why is it absolutely wrong? Is because when you look at residential property, it is made for growth and not made for cash flow. You need a cash flow generating strategy to get you to $5,000 passive every month. Now, of course, you could take $1 million of cold hard cash, put it in the bank, and get maybe 4-5% and get $40,000 to $50,000 in passive income straight away in this interest environment. So you add another $200K, you get your $60,000, and that's passive sitting there, except you don't get growth. There's no growth on your money. It's been eroded away by CPI, and if the interest rate drops in terms of home loans and everything else, then your term deposit drops from 4 to 5% to what we previously saw, 1%, 2%. So your passive income can be wiped out. Now, the key is not only just to get $5,000 a month in passive income, but that income has to keep growing with CPI, Consumer Price Index, so that when you're paying $10 for a loaf of bread in 10 years' time, or at the moment, in about 3 years' time, that you don't have to feel like your lifestyle's been eroded away, right? So there is one way, and there's really only one way to do it. And the way is through commercial property. Now, my name is Helen Tarrant. I help everyday Australians become wealthy through commercial property investment. If you're interested in going further in your commercial property journey, please click the link below, booking for your free strategy session, where we'll be able to take you from right now, where you want to go, to your passive income goals. Literally take you through what I'm showing you on this video, literally taking you through to the end and actually detailing what you can achieve in your passive income goals. It doesn't matter if 600K or 300K or 150K or just 60,000, and the pathway you need to get there, right? It is actually really clear through commercial property, and you can absolutely do it, right? So click the link below, register, but I do have a small favor to ask you. Please subscribe and hit the bell if you have enjoyed the video and other videos in my channel. Why is commercial property definable? So a couple of things. Firstly, if you invest in residential, you are going to find that when it comes to capital growth, it is hope and pray. If the market changes this year, you're going to get 10 to 15% growth. If the market does not change and stays flat, you might get 1%, 2%, or nothing at all. Sometimes you might go backwards because government policies or taxes coming in, right? As we see at the moment in the Melbourne market, right? So what about cash flow, right? You've got growth. So if you held onto a property in residential in 10 years time, generally it doubles, right? So therefore, if you bought a property for 500K or $1 million today, it's going to be worth $2 million in 10 years time, $1 million or $2 million, depending what you started with, right? Let's say you started with $1 million, it became $2 million in 10 years time. It makes sense that the rent is going to go from $800 you're getting today in rent on $1 million property, and that's already quite a bit, and that it might go to $1,600 in 10 years time. Yes, it will probably do that, or relatively might go to $1,200 or $1,400, depending on what the market is. But when you're looking at the $2 million and the $1,400 to $1,600 you're going to get, you're still not making a passive income. So why aren't you making the passive income? Well, it's purely because commercial property is a growth-driven investment strategy. Now, when you look at it, the idea is for it to grow really fast over a 10-year period, and it might happen in a 3, 5, or 7-year period. It might double itself, as we've seen in certain areas around Queensland and even in areas around different parts of Sydney. And of course, we've seen that in South Australia and parts of ACT. Now, because it's a growth-driven strategy, the idea is that it needs fuel to grow. It needs money to basically fuel its growth, and that might be it needs to pay for little bits of renovations in the here and there. It needs to be maintained properly. It's that the good tenants in there to keep the value up of the property, and the area needs to gentrify really well with other people like tenants or other like properties also going up in value, right? So that's really why it's got that growth, right? But if you look at it at the moment, if you had $1 million, if you bought $1 million property with cash, right? We're just talking cash, you are probably going to get about $40,000, $45,000 in passive income. So it's no different from sticking money in the bank, except you get growth. The growth is probably somewhere between 5 to 10% a year, depending on what you buy. And because it's not straight up, it's not linear, it goes up in chunks, right? So that's the benefit you get rather than sticking money in the bank. So the first option for you to get $5,000 passive income per month right, is to take $1 million, or actually a little bit more, 1.2, stick it in the bank at 4 to 5% interest rates and get your $60,000 in passive income. Number 2, you buy residential, the same $1 million or 1.2, you go and buy residential, right? And you put it in there and you get about 45 to 60,000. Again, the same as you would be in the bank. That's pretty much the same return. This is without loans. I'm talking about without loans, right? I'm going to add in loans a bit later. If you said, look, I don't have $1 million, how do I get there, right? So I'm going to share with that a little bit later. So you stick that in the bank, you get the 4 to 5%. You buy residential, you get the same 4 to 5% in terms of cash. So $40,000 to $50,000, maybe a little bit less, depending on the rents and depending where you're investing in it, right? But you get the nutritional growth. So you're growing your money all the way through the year and it holds its value. So it retains the value of your money, right? Because it is not invaded by inflation, which is fantastic, right? So that's the residential space. Now, if you're saying, well, I don't have $1 million, but also I want something that is going to hold its value, but also give me more cash flow than this, right? So then what do? The other option is commercial property. And it's the logical choice when you're in your 40s, about to plan for retirement and looking at retirement in the next 3, 5, 7, and 10 years, right? You can start, if you want to be aggressively retiring in 3 years, you can do it. If you want to passively do it in chunks and do it over 10 years period, absolutely can be done, right? So you put that $1.5 million into a property in commercial and you get a 6% net yield, like as in after all outgoings being paid by the tenant, you get $60,000 net rent, and that's your $5,000 passive income coming on autopilot. But one other key that is different from your bank, money in the bank, from your residential property is that each year there is a rental increase built into the lease, 3, 4, 5%, right? Which means that you get an extra few $1,000s per year back into your bank account. The value of the property in commercial property actually also grows in the same way that residential does. But even if it doesn't, even if it just grew by 5%, your actually return on investment, it's actually better than residential property, right? Because it gives you the cash up front. It gives you about 1 to 2% more than you would get in residential, right? Sometimes it even triples that or doubles that depending on what area you go to. So for example, you go to an area like a Rockhampton, you go to an area like Warrnambool, or you go to like regional small areas like a Roma or somewhere like that, or Warwick, like a small town, you're about to get your 8% there, right? Whereas even if you go there to buy a residential property, you still get your 4 to 5%. So you can double the money you get in, right? So you could have $80,000 in income rather than $60,000 or $40,000, right? But I'm just comparing apples with apples in terms of buying metro properties, right? So you will get, let's say 2% more if this is cold hard cash, 2% more than you would a residential property. So that will add to the bottom line. It compounds because it's got rental increases. Plus on top of that, it has the growth in the back end. And even if it's a few percentage less than residential, it still has the growth in the back end. And that growth will mean you maintain the value of your money and that it will grow exponentially with that area. So as the residential go up and the market changes, so would your commercial because of the demand in that market. In fact, more residential going up, more people in the market, more affluent the people, the more value of your commercial property goes up, right? It changes when you start out. You could be buying to an area where it's a cash flow game when you're getting good yield. The area changes, it now becomes a growth game, right? So that's the magic of commercial property. Now, if you've listened to this point, you're obviously interested in how to really leverage yourself to still get your $5,000 per month in passive income. And you can do that in a 5 to 7 year period through leverage. So you don't need a cold hard cash of $1 million or $1.2 million to be able to get your $60,000 in passive income. Now, one key to this is actually commercial property investment with a strategy, planning the big picture, working out your property profile, and having an expert team of people supporting you through the process, helping you with your structures, your cash flow, your calculations, your due diligence, your property selection, and all the way till settlement, and there to troubleshoot and support you all the way through, right? So if you are interested in that, join one of the largest communities we have in Australia on commercial property investors here, run by myself and the Unikorn team. Click the link below to find out more, but also do book in for that free strategy session where this whole video and every other strategy I talked about become real and personalized to you. So now let's talk about that $5,000, right? $5,000 in passive income, $60,000 in passive income per year, right? Now, if you want to achieve that, you need to get to a 10% cash on cash return. What does that mean? That means you need about $600K on a cash on cash return to be able to get to $60,000 in passive income. Now that's bearing in mind the interest rate might sit somewhere between 2 to 4% for you to be able to do that by going regional and clearing about a 3% margin, right? So what you need to do, the ultimate big picture, is you need to clear a 3% margin between what you borrow from the bank and what the tenant is giving you. And it takes a 5 to 7 year period to grow that, right? So let's look at this. So at the moment, our interest rate's obviously not between 2 to 4%, but in the good old days when it's 2 to 4%, you could go regional, buy 7% yielding property and get a 10% cash on cash return and really achieve that with $600,000. 10% cash on cash, $600,000, $60,000 in passive income. Now today, because interest rates have doubled, we're at 6.5 to 7%, we need to add in a 50% additional deposit to get the $60,000. So you need an additional $300K. So you need $900,000 to be able to get to $60,000. Now, you might not have $900,000 in your pocket, right? And not many people do. You could start with 2 to 300K, buy your first property, and over the next 5 years, preferably 3 years if you want to go aggressive, but you can do it in 5 years. 5 years, you can add in the rest of the 900K. So you're creating uplifts through having manufactured uplifts, but also uplifts in terms of areas that have exponential growth, increases in cash flow as well. They're just some strategies high level that obviously in your strategy session, I'm going to drill down, and don't forget to click the link to book in for that strategy session, because if you want this high level detail to you, that's what you need to do. Click the link and book that strategy call. But on another note, now 900K, what does that look like? So if today in time you had $900,000 in equity and you could access that equity, or you've got a redraw and you could access 500 of it, and you've got 900 that you really want to get to, then, and you can access half of it, you still want to do that, right? So the idea is that you then take 900K or 450K to start with, and then, do it in 2 steps. But basically you leverage that off a lease doc loan, right? A lease doc loan is based on the lease itself to finance it for you, right? So it doesn't require you servicing. So if you're really hard up with terms of residential and you just don't have the servicing, lease doc loan is your angel, is your venture capitalist, it's whatever you like to call it. It's your North Star, right? So through lease doc, as long as you can service the debt, so you will probably have to start out with a 7% roughly yielding property in regional, and work your way into more growth properties as you go through the journey. Because at 7% and you're borrowing 65% LVR, right, loan to valuation ratio, putting in 35% plus 5% cost, you can get at 7%, it will fully service a 65% leverage debt, right? So what does that mean to you, right? What does that 900K leverage to you? So if we divide it by 0.4, it comes up with 2.25 million of portfolio size. So that's the whole overall you need to invest. And that might require you to go 2 $1 million properties, 1.1, done. Or I might get 3. I wouldn't advise you to go lower. I'd rather actually, if you can go higher, the better. So you would be better off buying a 750 and a $1.5 million property, right? Just for future growth, finding the right location, paying a little bit premium at the moment, but letting the future compound itself in growth and cash flow. That's my suggestion. I wouldn't want to be wasting my time on $300,000 to $500,000 properties. It's not worth your effort, and you would find that value doesn't retain itself as well, right? So 2.25 million is the portfolio size. You can break it up whichever way, depending on what you have. If you only got 300, 500 now, you could be buying 1.25 to start with. In 3 years' time, you might refinance this property, plus have some money coming through from your other equity to buy the next million. But either way, you need to come to 2.25 million of commercial property starting yield. This is what averaged across the portfolio between 6 to 7%. Now it can be 6% if you have a bit more service and a bit more cash putting into the property, 7% if it's 105% finance. So what is 105% finance? It is where you finance the equity that you're pulling down from your residential property, or the money you're getting for the deposit includes the deposit, which is 35%, the 5% cost, and of course the 65% is the loan. So it's literally all finance, right? And what we know is that 4 rental increases of 3.5%, and you can average this out across your portfolio, means you move the needle by 1% in terms of your return, in your yield, your cash flow return. So you go from a 6% to 7% in 5 years' time with 4 rental increases. So 7% becomes 8%. So if it's all equity you're all getting, so money all financed, you will draw that money down. So bring it out of a redraw, or if it's in an offset, you pull that money out. You have to service that. You get a 7% property. It services everything. It's a neutral hold to start with. Neutral hold, not giving you much. It's a neutral hold to start with. You need to start with a 7% yield, and you need to build, right? So you might need to put in some more. You buy your first property, then you look at buying your second property somewhere around 2 2 to 3 years time, hopefully refinancing a bit of your first property, then looking at the equity from your other residential properties or some savings to be able to buy your second property. But either way, get to 2.25 million because that's the big goal, right? Not the 600 or 900,000, but the big goal, 2.25 million, right? Then what happens is that the 7% becomes 8%. 7% becomes 8% because we know it moves the needle by 1% with 4 years of rental increases. So your 7% becomes 8%. And in 5 years time, right? Let's look at where the interest rate's going to be, right? The interest rate at the moment is already talking about it coming down. It might go up again before it comes down, but at some point it's going to come down the next 12, 18 or 2 years, right? Eventually it'll probably never be 3 to 4% or 2%, but it might probably sit somewhere around 5% or 5.5%, right? So if the interest rate's at 5% and you've built yourself a portfolio of 2.25 million, 5% means it's 112,500 in terms of repayments for the interest. 112,500. Right? 112,500 is your repayment. Now, over those 5 years, you've got an 8% yield, right? You've got an 8%. You grew from 7% to 8%. Now, that might be 7 years because you might be buying your first property now, today, this year. You might be then buying your second property 2, 3 years down the track. So you might be 7 or 8 years because you need 5 years, right? 5 years with all of that solidarity. But remember, you're picking up cash flow along the way and growth along the way as well, right? But overall, your portfolio is now achieving 8% yield, 8% return, 8% cash, not growth.
Right now, 8% of 2.25 million is 180,000. 180,000. 4 zeros.
180,000, right? Now, if you take 180,000 and you take away your repayments on the 2.25 million, which is the 5%, which is 11250, right? You end up with 67,500. You take that away and that equals to $5,625 per month in passive income coming through on a fully leveraged portfolio. No cash coming out from you, nothing coming out from you, all leveraged against your previous properties, leveraged, just borrowed money, right? And how good is that, right? That's not including the growth on the property. If you got just a simple 5% growth on your 2.25 million over a 5-year period, it would be worth 2.734 million. So call it 2.74 million, 2.75 million. It will be worth at least that, right? It's probably going to be worth more close to 3 million because you're going to have exponential growth and tweaks and all the things we're going to do, right? I haven't accounted for market exponential growth or changes in rental, right? In that area. So you could be getting a property worth about 3 mil, right? But at worst, 2.75 million, right? There's $500,000 you've made on the growth of the portfolio, plus you're getting $67,500 in positive cash flow coming in. And that's the magic of commercial property and how that's fundamentally different from residential. And it's really the only way in this market for you to get your passive income of $60,000 per year coming through. Now, a lot of nuances go into this, complicated formulas, working out the property profile and everything else, and you really need a team to support you through it and show you the right way to do it, but absolutely doable and has been repeated by so many of our clients already. So again, if you found this video interesting, please hit the bell, subscribe, share this channel around, book in for your strategy session with the link below and join one of the largest communities in Australia of commercial property investors. Thank you very much, and don't forget, keep searching, keep looking, and I'll see you in the next video.